Aloha everybody. Welcome to History 241, Civilizations of Asia. Today we will be talking about Session 5, the Indo-Aryan civilization that got the Aryans established in the Indian subcontinent. Before we go into the presentation, Session 5, I should remind you about the WebCT, the assignments, the course, the syllabus, and some of the things that you need to do for this course. So welcome again to Session 5, History 241, Civilization of Asia. Today we are going to be talking about and dealing with the Indo-Aryan civilizations. My name is Karim Khan, and I teach here at Leeward Community College. Please, if you need to contact me, you can call my office or email me, which is right on your screen. You would need me to check constantly with me the course assignments. And so that's why I encourage you to please note down my email, which is also on the course outline. Whenever you need, you are most welcome to call me on my phone or email me. Whenever you email me, please remember to say in the subject slot to mention that you are my student from my TV class History 241. That's important because that's how I differentiate the students. I will know who is who. So please say in the subject slot, write History 241. So that would give me a clue that you come from the History 241 class. Okay, let's go into the session 5, which, as I said, deals with the Indo-Aryan civilization. But before that, I would like to review some of the material that we covered in the previous session 4. We talked about the Indus Valley civilization. We talked about the geography of the Indus River and the region. We went into the source of the river Indus and how river Indus, when it comes down to the modern day country of Pakistan, where it meets 4 other major rivers, it makes what is called the Punjab province. That is the land of the 5 rivers. Now, we also talked about the rise of agriculture and the Neolithic settlements in India, and how the other civilization in the West, that is Mesopotamia, had some sort of impact or influence on the rise of agriculture in the northwestern part of India, which is now Pakistan. We also talked about the major cities, Indus cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Then we went into the peoples and the products, agriculture, of course, mostly agricultural products, and the pottery and other inventions of the people of the Indus civilization. And then we finish at the fall of the Indus civilization, how that wonderful civilization came to an end and all abruptly. That would bring me to another point to alert you. If you remember, we quoted sort of a theory that Indus Valley civilization came to an end around 1500 BC. Now, this is just a theory. Still, there has to be done a lot of work to prove it. And because the Indus Valley civilization came to an end so all abruptly, all of a sudden, that almost no one single theory can hold, or we can say that this is the only cause, or this was the major cause for the fall of the Indus Valley civilization. It's a mysterious civilization, how it started and how it ended. That makes it, a complete mystery. Beside that, there is another mystery about the Indus Valley civilization that we talked about, was the script. It does not tell us much about the Indus Valley because it is still, it stands undeciphered and uncoded, and that's why we need to decode the script. And I said, if you did it, you might get, who knows, a Nobel Prize for that. Now, as I said, that the Indus Valley civilization came to an end close to about 1500 BC. Now keep in mind, our today's presentation might have to do something with that, because let's go what we are going to be covering in this presentation, session 5. We would be covering the origins of the Aryans. And some people believe that the Aryans, a group of people or linguistic or ethnic group of people that came from Central Asia to India, they were in fact responsible for the fall of the Indus Valley civilization. So there the two sessions, session 4 and session 5, are connected. So the end of the Indus Valley civilization is the beginning of the Aryan or Indo-Aryan civilization in India. We would also talk about the Aryans in terms of a race or linguistic group, and some of that stuff I'm going to leave it to you to do research and think for yourself which theory would make more sense to you, whether it was a racial group or linguistic group. That you would have to decide on your own, because there are a lot of sort of theories and speculations, and some of it is unfortunately caught in the nationalistic agenda or racial agenda of the people who are on the two sides of this issue. So let's see some other stuff that we're going to be dealing with. Aryans, Indian society, how they established their society in India, and also that society which was based on caste system. So we would talk about the caste system a little bit more to see the origins of the caste system and how it operated. And so let's go into the presentation, the origins of the Aryan civilization. When we say Aryan or Arya or Aryan, all these terms are Sanskrit and to some extent Persian, and in Sanskrit, which is or was the religious language of India, or the religious language of Hinduism as a religion. In that language, the term meant noble or pure, which also gave them a sort of a sense of superiority. And that's another unfortunate aspect of this term Aryan and or Arya, which people have claimed to use and advance their own racial or linguistic agendas. So right in the beginning of the session, I would like to warn you to take things in the context, and in the historical context and the context of the place and the period, so that we are clear when we say Aryans, our minds do not jump to unnecessarily to some of these white supremacist ideologies, or the ideologies of nationalism or racism that in 1930s and even today these days unfortunately or were so rampant. So keep in mind the term Aryan is a very old term, way before the modern people, in the 19th or the 20th century, started using it for their nationalist agenda. So that's a warning. It's a very ancient term used in Sanskrit language as well as in Persian language, the language of Iran. So it meant noble, it meant purity, but at the same time, the Aryans at that time also used it, I would say, in a sort of racial connotation and racial meaning. So keep that in mind. Also, we would see if the Aryan group of people were they racial or ethnic or linguistic group. Most people believe, this is the sort of latest theory, that it was a linguistic group and did not have necessarily anything about the race or ethnicity of these people. So when we say Aryan, that's a group of people who used a particular language. But this particular group of people, some people believe, some scholars believe that they constitute an ethnic or racial group. Now, it's very difficult to separate the language from the group or the group from the language. Now, because of the easy mobility among people from one continent to another continent, country to country, continent to continent, people to people, it's very easy for people to adopt other languages and keep their, ethnicity intact. So the ethnicity would be the old ethnicity of the person, but he or she might lose, or later on, their children might lose their language. And still we can call them whatever we call them in terms of race, ethnicity, but they may not have that language that they used to speak. So language can come and go, and similarly, race can also, or ethnicity can also come and go. They might retain the language, but they may not retain ethnicity. And I've seen that, in my own life, especially living in Hawaii. You see that interaction between race and identity, language and identity, and how you can lose one or keep the other. And it depends on, what you want to emphasize. You want to emphasize the language to make you belong to a particular group of people, or you want to emphasize the blood, the race or ethnicity to belong to a certain group of people. So here too, there's the division. Were the Aryans, a linguistic group or a racial group? Most people, most scholars, they treated Aryans previously, that is before, 1980s, they treated them as a group of ethnicity, as an ethnic group and race group, who use a certain language that became sort of, the proto-mother language of other Indo-European languages that we would talk about. So I would say treat it also both race as well as linguistic group, because it's very difficult sometimes to, separate the two. However, down the road, it may be possible to do that. But let's see further on. Close to about 3000 BC, this particular group of people, Aryans, they originated somewhere in the area which is now between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. That is a sort of a general area or region or place that scholars believe that the Aryans originated between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Some people identify the area that is between Ukraine in the north and Iran in the south, and in between, But if you look at the map, it's the same area, not too far away from Ukraine or Iran. So the area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, Caspian in the east and Black Sea in the west, or Ukraine in the north and Iran in the south, that area is considered to be like the original homeland of the Aryan people. And around 3000 BC, these people exhausted the already existing resources, food stuff, agriculture, water, water, or the already existing agriculture resources. They exhausted, and like other people, they also migrated or moved on as nomadic people from place to place. So close to about 3000 BC, they started this immigration or out-migration from that area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and went into different directions. One group, and this took them long time, they did not move all of them at one time. Some tribes left early, sometimes, a little later, and so they kept on moving and getting out of the place as late as 1500 BC. So 1500 BC is the time period that some people believe that they came to India. Let's see that. As I said, the area is between Ukraine and Iran. That also sort of gives you the place between Europe and Asia, which is between the two places. Aryans, they dispersed in different directions. They did not go to one place, all of them to one place, nor they got out of the place at one time. So there is the difference between the place and the period. their out-migration. Not all people left the area at one time, nor all of them went to one place. Different places, they went there. Some groups, they reached Central Asia. Central Asia, which is the modern day area of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, all these stans, these constitute the place what we call the Central Asia. And they reached Iran and modern day Afghanistan and northwestern part of Pakistan, which was part of India at that time. And when we say Iran, as I mentioned it here, Iran, it means literally, it means the land of the Aryan people, or Aryans land. It's an old Persian and Sanskrit language. The meaning of Iran is land of the Aryans. So there is a connection between Iran and Aryans, and interestingly, if I mention this, it should be not out of place or out of time, that Iran, this term, although it's a very old term in Persian language, but the country of Iran did not use it as much as they started using it in 1935. What happened was the Shah of Iran, or the king of Iran, they changed the name of the country from Persia to Iran. Persia, Persis, this was an old biblical name for that place, which always referred to the place in terms of the territory or the boundary or the location, Persia. So Bible used a non-racial type of a term for that place, Persia, as we used it also. Now in 1935, Persia, the king of Persia, they changed the name of Persia to Iran. And the reason for that was that the people, or those who were in power at that time in Persia, they wanted to denote the racial or the ethnic meaning of the place Iran. And as I said, as you know, Iran literally meant in Persian language and Sanskrit as the land of the Aryan people. Now, you wonder why in 1935 they changed their name from Persia to Iran. The reason was they changed it because they wanted to identify themselves with this, sort of a Aryan movement that was going on in Germany. By now, in 1935, the Nazis had already come into power, and in fact, they had started their racial agenda and their racial machine against non-white people or against the Jewish people. And so this sort of this Aryanism, so to speak, also inspired people in Iran who looked at themselves, hey, we are the real Aryans. This is the birthplace of the Aryan nation, Iran. So that's why they sort of, got inspired, and just to attach themselves more closely to Germany, which was a rising star in Europe in 1930s. And unfortunately, they did not know what Germany would do, not only to, their own people that live among them, especially the Jewish people, and what they would do to the entire Europe. So they did not know that, but anyway, they got inspired and they changed the name from Persia to Iran in 1935. Let's go back to the presentation. This is the time that Aryans, they reached close to northwestern India. And from here now, we would think of and talk about the Aryans in terms of Indo-Aryans, because there were Aryans who went to Germany, who went to other places in Europe, even to Russia. But this particular group of Aryans that we would talk in session 5, it would be much more in the terms of Indo-Aryans. So let's see the original place, or the place of origins of the Aryan nation or Aryan people. And again, please do not, associate the term right away with the Nazi party or the German, racist group of people that were there under, the leadership of Hitler. So let's see the original birthplace. This is a sort of journal area that we will be talking about in this presentation. So between the Black Sea in the west and Caspian Sea in the east, this was the original homeland. And one group of people or groups of people, tribes, they started, getting out of that place and getting into different direction. But this one is one group of people or tribe that started coming to Iran and Afghanistan and further into India. And so I want to emphasize that from now onward we will be talking about the Aryan people much more in terms of India rather than, Russia or Europe that they went. So let's see, when this group of people, they took long time. And what happened was between, ancient Ukraine or ancient Iran, or for that reason, ancient India and Northwest, they did adopt the ways of doing things of different people. They also adopted other languages and other, terms that they came in contact with other people. But at the same time, a group as they were, they remained very intact. They kept themselves mostly, and what it did, it kept their language with them. So as they moved, while they did adopt terms, terminologies, words from other languages, they kept their language as a whole intact with them. And they also influenced the people in this area. In Ukraine or Iran or India or Afghanistan, they linguistically influence other people who adopted their terminology. So what you see here is the mixing of people with the Aryans, or Aryans mixing with the local people, adopting some of them and giving them, some of their own terms. So this would be much more, in the historical context that happens to almost any group of people. And what I'm suggesting basically here is the racial purity does not remain once a group of people, they leave their original homeland and they move out to other places and they settle down, in other places, in other communities, the places that other communities already, preoccupy or exist there. So there is much more this emphasis on the mixing and the mingling with other people, and losing their original purity of blood if there was any. So that's sort of my thinking. You can do your own research, how people, they mix with other people and they lose the racial composition or blood composition or sort of linguistic composition or culture composition. That's how, we learn from each other by mixing with each other. Okay, let's see something else. More in the regarding the origins of the Aryans. Close to about 1500 BC, they conquered India. Aryans conquered India, and that's what I'm saying we would be talking about much more now, Indo-Aryans, when we refer to them. This, as I said in the beginning of the session, meant the fall of the Indus Valley civilization. Now, there is not a lot of proof that they really conquered, these cities, Indus cities, and killed or massacred the population. There is not much of that proof, but still, this is a theory which holds good, that they conquered the Indus Valley and moved the people, to somewhere else. Aryans, they were very different people when they came first from the native peoples of India. India was, of course, full of people at that time, but they were very different. Aryans were very different from them. Aryans, there are, Indian scholars who believe that Aryans were not foreigners. They did not come from any other place. They were the natives of India. And this is also, I think, much more in terms of the Indian sort of nationalism, or just so recently, in 1990s and the early part of the 21st century, a group of people came to power in India, which is commonly referred to by their party, the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party. The BJP, and some of them were very nationalist people, Hindu fundamentalist. It's a common description that people, terminology that people describe them with. And they believe that people should never think of the Aryans as foreigners. They were sons and daughters of India. They did not come from outside. They were the native people of India, but the true scholarship, science and archaeology and historical scholarship, does not agree with the Indian fundamentalist, religious fundamentalist or nationalist point of view. So there is a new, movement going on in India, which wants to sort of, present the Aryan people not as foreigners, but the original, people of India. And most historians, especially Western or American historians, do not agree with this type of a change of the history or revision of the history. So if you ask me, I would say Aryans were not natives of India. They were a foreign group of people who came, and later on they became Indianized, and they became, of course, the sons and daughters of India. When they lived for so long, they did not leave India. They stayed in India and made India as their home. Okay, let's move on further. Aryans as linguistic group. Now, Sanskrit language of the Indo-Aryans, that became or was their main language. And there are a lot of similarities between European languages and the Sanskrit language or the Persian language, which all suggest that there had to be, an original common source for these languages like Sanskrit, Persian, Greek, Latin, German, Russian, English, etc. So these Indo-European languages, they share so much in terms of the diction, vocabulary, even sometime, the grammar similarities. There's so many similarities that suggest that these languages came out of an original, mother tongue or mother language, and that some people believe, was the original language of the Aryan people who left their original place and went into different directions, into India, into Russia, and other places of Europe. So keep that in mind, and that is one thing that the Aryans are treated much more as a linguistic group rather than as a racial group. The Indo-European languages are very different from the Semitic languages like Arabic and Hebrew. I just wanted to mention that, which is not part of our course, but I wanted to say the Indo-European languages are very different from the Semitic languages of Arabic and Hebrew. Now, let's see the linguistic movement of the Indo-European languages, starting from the same place of the original place of the Aryan people. This group of people and the language, it moved, towards east up to about Iran, Afghanistan, and then India. That's one wave or way off for these people going, or they're taking their language with them. Another one was going towards north and northwest, into Russia, into Ukraine, into different parts of Europe. So wherever they went, they took their language, mixed it with the local people, and they gave them their language, adopted their terms. In different places they adopted different terms, terms related to agriculture, especially terms related to religion. The Sanskrit or the Indo-Aryan language was not a huge big language. It had limited diction. But whatever limited diction it had, it gave it to other people, to the people of India as well as to the people of Europe. And that is how the Indian languages and the Sanskrit language of India and Persian language and other European languages are, they share so much in common, and that's how it suggests that there was an original mother language from which, these other sister languages emerged. So let's move on further in the presentation. Now we will talk about the Aryans as Indo-Aryans from now onward. About 1500 BC, they entered India from Afghanistan. Of course, to Afghanistan they came from Iran, and from Iran into Central Asia. They invaded and conquered northwestern India, which is modern-day Pakistan, and from there they moved further down in India. They spread towards the northeast, where the Ganges and Jamna, river Jamna, they meet in the two rivers land called the Doab, that is closer to Bengal, that area. So they occupied the best places, that were on the banks of river Ganges and river Jamna, which is in the northeastern part of India. And there, Aryans, they came in contact with other people who already existed. They conquered them, and Aryans enslaved the Dravidians, which were the natives of India, or they could be the peoples of the Indus Valley civilization, from where, the Aryans sort of draw them out. Now, here a lot went, we just talking about in history in terms of 1500 BC, but it took them a lot of time. They had to cover a lot of land, a lot of place. It's not easy. Nothing happens in one day or one night or 1 year or even 1 century when it comes to history, although our speed is like 500 years per minute here, but still it takes a lot of time for people to settle down, come in contact with other people, either in conflict or in cooperation. It's never, easy for people to get used to other people who already exist there. So conflict, arises, and that's what happened between the Aryan people and the Dravidians, or the local people, native people of the Indus Valley civilization or the rest of India. So here, from now onward, we can see the conflict, or later on the co-option and the cooperation between these foreigners, Aryans, and the native people of India, the Dravidians, and how they would come together and evolve a completely brand new religion and lifestyle. That religion later on would become as Hinduism. That would be part of, of another special session. And they would also evolve a social system that we would talk about later on as the caste system. So let's go into the Indo-Aryans further. They established a race-based society, and that was the Aryans. They were white people and taller. The Aryans were Caucasian people and taller people. The Dravidians, the local people, that they started calling them Dasa or Desi, which means native or local people. So the Dravidians were darker people and shorter people. And this is the commonly accepted theory, but there are people who also point out to the exception among the Dravidians, who are very tall people and not so darker as the native the Aryans believed. So we are introducing two terms: the Dravidians, which is the native people, and the Aryans, they used to call them Dasa, which means the native people. And these native Dasa or Dravidian, they were darker and shorter compared to the Aryans, who were Caucasian people, white and taller. In India, by close to about 1500 or after, what you see is the foreign white Aryan minority ruling the dark Dravidian majority. So foreign people coming and ruling the local people, the native people of India, and out of this conflict, which it was, you would see the evolution of cooperation between the two people. Now, I must mention one more thing that is not here, and that is when it comes to the people, Aryan people. Remember, we talk about the places between Caspian Sea and the Black Sea as the original homeland of the Aryan nation. down south of the Caspian Sea and a little north of Iran. There is a whole region, mountain region, that is called Caucasus. And since it was from this region that the Aryans, they came to that region, the Caucasus Mountain, lived there, and as they were nomadic people, they exhausted the local naturally available resources in the Caucasus Mountain. They moved further north, further south to Iran, and then to Afghanistan, and then to India. Now, just because they started getting out of the Caucasus Mountain, here comes to another terminology in its being, and that is Caucasian. So Caucasian is a person who, originally the Aryans who moved out of Caucasus, came to Iran, and ever since, any person who is a white person compared to the darker Arabs or the Hebrews, the Jews, or compared to the darker Daza, Dravidian people of India, a white person is called Caucasian or Caucaside because they emerged out of the Caucasus Mountain and got into Iran and into Afghanistan and India. I just wanted to mention that why we call the white people as Caucasian, because they lived for some time in the Caucasus Mountain and then moved out of there to India. Let's move on further with the Indo-Aryans and see what else did they do. There was an interaction between the Aryan nomadic masters and the Dravidian settled people that they enslaved, and it would be out of this interaction between the masters and the slave, the Aryan nomadic people and the Dravidian settled agriculture people, that you would see that they would influence each other. So there started right away mutual influences after they settled down, after whatever conflict it took them. The Dravidians adopted the Aryan religion, that's for sure, and the Aryans adopted Dravidian agricultural practices as well as architecture, because Aryans were primarily nomadic people. They just moved from one place to another place and ate up whatever was naturally available. They did not grow their own food. They were not agricultural people. So that's how, when they come in contact with the Dravidian people, there they started learning techniques of agriculture, how to grow their food, and how to build their homes, which they did not have sort of a practice or a history of. So that's why it's very important that out of this conflict between the two, the masters and the slaves, if we can call them that way, the invaders and the invaded people, the foreigners and the local people, they started an interaction, mutually influence each other. As I said, the native people, they adopted, the religion of the masters. They must have imposed it upon them. But at the same time, the masters, they also, to make it easy for the native people to adopt their religion, the master race, that is the Aryan race, they also adopted the religion or the gods or the deities or some of the religious practices of the local people, the Dravidian people. So it was not really pure Aryanism or pure, Indianism. It was a mixture of both, as we would see in different places in different parts of the world and among different people. So that's what was going on in India. The Aryans coming and taking something that they did not have, especially agriculture and architecture. And let's see further on. This interaction that existed between the two, Dravidian words, they entered into the Aryan Sanskrit language, and most of those words belong to food production, agriculture, as well as architecture. So the Aryans, they were learning new things from the Dravidian people. Aryan Sanskrit script also utilized the Indus ideograms and the Aramaic script of West Asia. This is just a theory, but most people believe that Aryans did not write their Sanskrit language. They would only use it as speech, which is very common with so many people. They can speak their language, but they cannot write their language. But it was here when the Aryans came to India, they needed to write their language. And it was here that they adopted a script to write their, spoken language, Sanskrit. Now, they could not invent their own script. So the theory is that they adopted some of the old, script of the Indus Valley civilization, and there is a debate, why they would do that and how they could do that when the Indus Valley civilization script was so difficult for adoption, or so difficult even today, for decoding. Well, you think about it, but I believe that at that time, among the people of India, did live those people who could read and write the Indus script. That's just my thinking, were based on reading of other scholars, that there were people at that time by 1500 BC, as the Aryans were coming, there were people who could read and write the Indus script. That is one. And the Dravidians, they also used it. But unfortunately, as Sanskrit became a predominant language in northwestern part of India, people forgot almost everything about the Indus script, and that's why nobody till this day can decode it. So that's one. Also, the Aryan people, they adopted the Western script, that is the Aramaic, and it's a very interesting phenomena that they would adopt Aramaic script. Aramaic script was a sort of Arabic and Hebrew based script, and a very important script because it was very widespread not in India, but in Afghanistan or Iran and other parts of Mesopotamia and other parts of the Middle East. A very wide script, the Aramaic script. Aramaic, you might know it, it's very important in the history of Christianity because that was the language which the people or the tribe of Jesus Christ used to speak. So it has, Christian origins and Christian attachment and significance, the Aramaic script, which was widely used, in that period in that place. So the Aryans adopted the two scripts, put it together, and somehow, out of them they created a new script, which is very common for people to do that. It happened similarly, the same thing happened to Urdu. A brand new language was created, in India, which is the sort of national language of Pakistan these days. We will talk about that when we get to. But let's move on into the presentation. Aryans became Indians, just as Mongol invaders of China became Chinese. Now, Aryans, they lived for too long in India. They became Indianized, so to speak, and they adopted Indian languages, Indian food, Indian agriculture, Indian, architecture, and although they kept themselves in power, but they became Indians. So this is called the Indianization of the Aryan people. So they are no more foreigners, although they might think of them, but they were no more foreigners, and they became much more Indianized people. They abandoned their nomadic pastoral lifestyle and became settled agriculture people. They had to produce their own food now, and so no more, nomadism. They did not need to roam around or cruise around for food. They could grow their food right there, on the banks of Ganges and Jamna and so many other rivers in India. And so they settled and they adopted the settled agricultural lifestyle. They also started massively using the metals for agriculture and irrigation. This is one more thing that they needed and they did not have before, the use of metals for agriculture and irrigation. Although they could have swords and knives as a group of invaders, but that was a very limited use of metal to make swords and knives. But now, since they didn't have to conquer any other places or people because they themselves became masters of the land, and they needed to utilize the land to the full extent and get maximum benefits from the land in terms of agriculture and irrigation or construction, building construction. That's how they became metal user on a huge, big, massive scale. Let's see further on. The Aryan society, as it was established somewhere between 1500 BC and 500 BC. Some of the essentials of the Aryan society in India. Now, number one, when we say Indo-Aryan society or Aryan society in India, the most important item or the essential item of that society would be Sanskrit language. Now, Sanskrit language is the ancient language of India that came, of course, with the Aryans. It was also the religious language of India that came also with Aryans, and the religion that Sanskrit became associated with, that would be later on known as Hinduism. So Sanskrit, think of Sanskrit as ancient language of India, and also think of Sanskrit as the religious language of India. That is the religious language of Hinduism, a predominant religion of India. Now, Sanskrit also you could think of, and there are scholars who believe that Sanskrit is or was as important to India as Latin was important to Rome, or later on to European civilization and European people, because it was Latin that became primarily the language of Christianity in Europe, the language of Bible and the language of scholarly writing. So Latin became very much the language of the church, the language of the priest and the clergy, in Europe. So that's why Sanskrit is to India what Latin was to Rome and Europe and the Christianization of Europe and the spread of Christianity. So very important language for India. It used to be called a dead language, just like Latin language. Dead languages are those languages which are written and read, but which are not spoken. So one more time, dead language is a language which is written and read but never spoken. However, Sanskrit has been brought to the level of speech. So it is becoming now alive and sort of born again, language. So one can speak it, and there are not millions of them, but thousands and thousands of people, especially scholars related very much, to religion. They can speak, they can read, and they can write it. Let's move on into the Aryan society. Another major feature or essential feature of the Indo-Aryan society is the social or the caste system as it evolved, and we would get into that later in a few minutes, how it emerged. Also, the Brahman or the priestly rule, the Brahman caste that started to rule India, that's also a very important essential feature of the Aryan society. Because of the emphasis on centralized sort of government in India, you see the rise of republics and kingdoms in different parts of India. So the republic or the kingdoms, don't confuse the two. They could be the same thing, but different people use different terminologies. So republic would be as much a kingdom as kingdom would be a republic. So these republics or kingdoms sprang up in different parts of India. So one more time, if we go to the presentation, how these different essential parts became the Aryans, the essential parts of Aryan society: Sanskrit language, the social or the caste system, the Brahman or the priestly rule in India, and the rise of republics and kingdoms. Let's move on further. The socio-economic and political changes that came with the Aryan society or with the rise of the Aryan society in India. As the Aryans, they were nomadic people. They were very poetic people, and all that poetry, lyricism, became literature once they became settled people. Literature, it demands writing, it demands reading, and which they did not have. But now that they could, they learned how to read and how to write their language in a new script that the Sanskrit adopted, so that lyricism or poetry became literature from now onward. That poetry also turned into philosophy. And that is one of the major features of the Aryan society, poetry and philosophy going together. Philosophy coming out of the religion, also very unique feature of the Hindu religion. From invasions, they became settled people. So no more invasions, they became settled people, and with the settlements you see a new shape of life and a new style of life would start in India. Also, the Aryans changed from nomadism to civilization. So no more nomadism, they would become civilized people, cultured people, and they would take the shape of the Indian life, or the shades and the languages and the different ways and means of doing things in India. Particularly the Indian local people, their gods and deities, they would adopt Indian food, which they never had. So all this was part and parcel of the change that the Aryans turned themselves into. They became now Indians, as Indians are known for great variety of food, for great philosophy based on Hinduism, for a great ancient language, which is Sanskrit, and a lot of poetry, which is also part of the Hindu religion. So like Mahabharata and Ramayana, that later on we would talk about when we get to the Hindu civilization. So the Aryans, they would becoming very changed people, civilized people, and becoming Indianized. So let's move further on in the Aryan society. Close to about 1000 BC, the Vedas, which are the holy books of the Hindu religion, they became complete orally. They were completed, and Vedas, the term is Sanskrit, which stands for wisdom and knowledge or vision. So these are the holy books of Hinduism, the sacred books of Hinduism, the Vedas. Also, this is the time when the Vedic hymns, as they were completed, they were memorized. They were committed to memory, not yet written, but they were committed to memory, also very important for the rise of a new religion. Close to about somewhere between 500 and 200 BC, the Vedas, they were turned into scriptures, written scriptures. So the Vedas were now written, and they could be read in different places. They could be moved, the scriptures, and spread into the rest of India, and people there could read it, although they had to know the language, which was the Sanskrit script. Now, because of the written scriptures and the need for them to be written and read out in different ceremonies of religion or politics or government, now was needed a group of literate people, or call them priests. Those were Brahmins. So for any script, for any religion which is now based on scriptures, written scriptures, you need people who can read and write those scriptures, and hence the rise of the Brahman people as a group of people. Let's move further on. We're still close to about somewhere between 500 and 200 BC. Warfare diminished. As I said, these invaders became very much civilized or settled people, so warfare went down. And now these warrior kings and caste, the warrior caste, they lost their importance, and life became much more important in the sense that agriculture, technology, other sciences, they became more important. So warriors, they were no more in need. Religious leaders, Brahmins, they gained social significance in the society. They were the people who could mediate between deities, gods, and the people on the ground. So that's how the Brahman caste was gaining more and more power in the society, because they were not only religious leaders, but also they were very much tied to the government, and some of them they could rule, and they had to rule because of the caste system. Let's move on further. Speaking of the Brahman, how the Brahmanic rule started, as I said, that The Brahmins, they were the one who were the priests who could read and write. So rise of the Brahmins. They had to perform difficult, elaborate sacrifices, the Brahmins. It is one group of people, one caste, and their duty was to perform, sacrifices, to read from Sanskrit-based Vedas, to do different rituals in the Hindu temples. So that's why the Brahmins were much more in need and they were rising in power. Also in the Hindu religion, there was this emphasis on the perfect or the precise performance of the sacrifice, so that it would be accepted by gods, and gods or deities would, accept the prayers and listen to the prayers and grant them their wishes, the wishes of the people. So that's why the Brahmins were rising in power. Now, we're talking about the Brahman. Think of the Brahmins in two ways. Number one, as a priestly class, but also as a ruling class. Some Brahmins, not all of them, some Brahmins would become rulers, as some rulers would be Brahmins. There would be a place and period in the history of India that Brahmins would stay away from power and leave other people to become rulers, but these rulers would need the Brahmins because there was so much emphasis on this church and religion, the church and the state in the country. So that's why do not confuse the two terminologies, the priest and the rulers, because the Brahman performed almost the two duties at one time simultaneously, and sometimes they would be separate from the state and focusing on their religious duties and business. Let's see some more stuff in the presentation. This precise knowledge, the knowledge of precise sacrifice, also encouraged the study of anatomy. So the Brahmins, they had to know every rib, every vein, every part of the sacrifice. So it also gave them much more knowledge of the human body, and so sort of the study of anatomy, which would later on become part and parcel of the medical profession. So something good was coming out of all these sacrifices. The correctly pronounced or chanted liturgy encouraged Sanskrit grammar and literature. Some of the languages, they would be known for some feature, a major feature of their own, like poetry or prose, but Sanskrit very much known for its grammar and literature, and the reason for that was that it had to be correctly pronounced in the temple services at that time. And so that also gave more power to the Brahmins, because only they could correctly pronounce or do it in such a way that it would make sense to the deities or to the gods, even if it did not make sense to the people on the ground. So that's how the rise of the Brahmins was associated with the sacrifice and Sanskrit language. The rightly located altars created geometry in India. So in the temples, one had to know where the altar should be located. And so this created not only geometry, the science of geometry, or encouraged the study of geometry, but also encouraged mathematics in India. And that is why, ever since, from ancient times, India is associated with mathematics, associated with accounting, because it came from, religion, although always, in other civilizations, as we know, counting and accounting much more related to commerce and business, and agriculture and surplus product that people produce. But here, religion also promoted, mathematics, geometry, anatomy, and sort of a geography, where the altar should be located. Let's move on further. Still in the rise of the Brahmins, the rulers looked to Brahmins for legitimacy. The ruler could belong to one or the other caste, the upper caste, but still they needed the Brahmins so that they would have the blessing of the Brahman, the priest, or the church, so to speak. So there you see the union between the church and the state, and the society also was attached to both of them. The society, the people at large could not do it. They could not gain their salvation, so to speak. They could not get closer to deities. They could not get their wishes or prayers answered without the help of the Brahmins. So that's why the society was so much dependent on the Brahmins, and that's how the Brahmins gained so much power. Also, the state, to legitimize itself, it needed the help of the Brahmins that would make people or advise people not to rise against the Brahman blessed ruler or his state. Now, the society of caste, the Brahmanic rule, the Indo-Aryans society that got established in India after 1500, it was based on the castes, and we will see further how this caste system worked. The creation of the caste system, it was needed because the professions, different professions that the rulers or the states or the republics or the kingdoms, they needed different professional people. So these professions became castes, or the professions, they created castes. People were born into or belonged to families of particular caste or specialist, as every person is born to set of parents who belong to a certain group of people. And so that is how in Hinduism or the Indo-Aryan caste system, people became identified with the families in which they were born. And the families became identified with the work that they performed. So work became the identity of the person who was born in a particularly family that performed a particular work. So keep in mind that the profession, the work created the caste. But this is more than that. This is something like a teacher's son or daughter has to be a teacher, which is good. But what if they want to change their profession? The son and daughter do not want to become a teacher, they want to become doctor. Or the sons and daughters of doctors, they do not want to be doctors, they want to be something else. Well, in the caste system, you cannot do that. You are born in a certain family which takes a certain type of profession, work, and so you would be also tied to that work. So let's see further. As I said, the profession created the caste, and as people, individual, they were born in certain families who performed certain tasks. That is how people were identified to caste. Now some of these castes, they were specialists in particular work, like they were artisans, they dealt in metal or leatherware, they were workers, that created metal or leather products, there were potters, there were merchants, and there were servants. So different people adopted different profession, and they became identified with those professions. But in the caste system, people could not change their profession. So let's see further on. India became home to distinctive races. Aryans, that were the invaders, and the non-Aryans, that is the local people, the native people that we call Dravidians. That is how basically the whole thing was originally. Aryans were masters and they were rulers. Dravidians, they were the enslaved people, but the Aryans love to call them Malichas. Malicha is a Sanskrit Indian term which means impure and inferior. The Aryan white masters, they started treating their Dravidian dark people, enslaved people, in a very brutal way. So they were to refer to them as Malichas, which means impure and inferior. Now, somewhere after 1500, you see the rise of four major castes. And the four castes, they were sort of made out of the 4 parts of Hindu deity or god. Brahmans were created from God's mouth or head, just as mouth and head is at the top of the human body, so these Brahmans would be at the top of the social body, the society, so they would be the priest and they would be the rulers. Just as mouth is, it speaks for the whole body, so the Brahmans would speak as priest for whole, religion, and they would be just as head rules the body, the physical body, the Brahmins would rule the social body. Then another group of caste, Kshatriya. These were born from the arms or were created from the arms of the deity, and so they went into the army. That was their duty, to go and enlist in the army and defend the country. So you have rulers, the Brahmins, and somebody had to defend the country, and so you get the Kshatriya as the defenders or the military people in India. Another group of people, Vaisya or Vaishya, they were made out of the thighs of God. And so they, thighs being strong in the body, they had to do this difficult job, agriculture, so they became agriculturalists. These 3 groups, originally they belonged to the Aryan race. And the 4th one, the Shudra, they were made out of feet. And just as feet are at the bottom of the human body, so were the Shudras or the Sudras or the Sudras or Shudras as they're called. They were at the bottom of the social, body or the society. So it was their job, dirty job, servants, and it was their job to clean, the toilets or deal with the dead bodies and take, the dead animals. So the Shudra group of people, they belong to the Dravidian local native people that were enslaved. Sometimes these Shudras are called untouchables. They are pariah. They live on the sides, and they are also called Harijans and Dalits. Nowadays it's a fashion to call them as Dalits. That is the suppressed people. Gandhi, he worked hard to to change the social status or uplift the untouchables or the Shudra people, to a higher status. So he used to call them Harijans, that is the children of God. And Harijan was also the name of Gandhi's newspaper or journal that he used to write in. So that's how he named these people Harijans. However, the British that lived in India and ruled India for close to about 200 years, they used to call them untouchables, and they adopted this terminology from the upper Hindu caste, because if the upper Hindu caste touch the low caste person, the Shudras or the Shudras, they themselves would become polluted or unclean, and they had to do some atonement, some penance, something to clean themselves, and hence the term or the terminology of untouchable and Harijans and Dalits. Let's move on further in the caste system. Originally there were 2 color people, that's called Varnas. 2 Varnas or 2 color people, that is the white Aryans and the dark Dravidians, that the Aryans used to call the Dravidians as Dasa, that is the local people. So these 2 colors originally, the white and the black, or the Caucasian people and the dark skinned people, these were the original 2 colors. However, these 2 colors were increased to 4 colors, and that is the white, red, yellow, and black. And what happened was that the non-Aryan people who were specialists in different activities or works, they were assimilated in the upper 3 castes. And so the upper 3 castes were not anymore purely Aryans or Aryans. They took people from the Dravidian class or the native people and gave them, different groups or castes. These people who were brought into the new Varnas or the 4 Varnas, they were called Dvija. Dvija, like twice born. Once they were born, physically, when they came to I mean life. And the other one was when they were, sort of initiated in the religion, and so that's what they were called twice born. Their deities, the deities or the gods of the native people, they were incorporated in Aryan religion, so to make it easy for them, the transition from the local into the Aryan. Let's see further on. The system became very segregated, and the segregation was based on the religious ban. It was religiously, oriented caste system segregation, and religion banned intermarriages between the castes. So wherever you were born, you stay there and marry in your own caste. Do not get out of the caste. And we would talk about more of this system in terms of Hinduism as religion. There was no social interaction between, different castes. Nobody could eat, or at least the low caste people could not eat or drink. There were also geographical barriers in India that kept people, sort of away and detached from people. You see the desegregation of the caste, especially with the coming of Islam, which does not believe in the caste system. Also, the British colonized India, and they brought Christianity. So British colonization and Christianity helped people and moved people out of the caste. With urbanization, also the caste system went down in the cities, and there started sort of Sanskritization when the low caste people, they adopted the Sanskrit language, learning and using Sanskrit language. They also started behaving, the low caste people behaving like the upper caste people. So that's how what we call the caste mobility. And the Indo-Aryan rule, in fact, it was based on so many other, different things that we would talk about in terms of the Hindu religion. We don't need to talk about all of them right now. Let's see, in conclusion, we talked about the origins of the Aryan people as an ethnic group and race group. They invaded India, and they started, their own Aryan social system called the caste system. Also, the caste system, keep in mind, it was based on the Hindu religion, which we would which we will take another time. Thank you very much for joining us today. History 241, Civilizations of Asia.